So I used to pastor a church in Madison. First church I pastored, I was 21 years old when I got hired there. And there was a guy named Francis one day who wanted to start attending the church. And I'm like, well, of course you can start attending the church. Well, then he told me, though, that he had been thrown out of the church twice. But I'm young and dumb, and I'm thinking, hey, someone wants to attend, and it's a small little church. The answer is yes. How much trouble can this be? First meeting I ever led as a senior pastor, 21 years old, stand in front of the audience or congregation. There's probably about 30 people in the room. And this guy stands up and says something just awful to this big farmer in the back. That farmer stands up, threatens to come and knock his block off. A woman in the back row jumps up, bursts into tears and says, "Doesn't anything ever change around here?" and runs out of the room. That's my first ever annual meeting as a young pastor, first ever. That little guy created more conflict, and I've never seen such nastiness. One time we were walking through the building, and he said, "You know what? This is my church, and if I want to shoot holes in it, I'll shoot holes in it." And he was a great shot, and he could reload fast. It's like, what in the world is going on? Have you ever had to spend time around a person with a critical attitude? Have you ever been around a person with a critical attitude? Some of you were raised in a home with a parent who had a critical attitude. It's like it didn't matter what your report card said. You could have all A's, but they were going to talk about the one that wasn't an A. It's like, and you just got the sense that it was never good enough. Your room was never good enough. Your looks were never good enough. Your performance in school was never good enough. It just constant was the message that you got. Some of you, it wasn't at home that you received that. It was in a romantic relationship. You got the sense that you are not good enough as you are. You are not okay. This romantic relationship would be so much better if it weren't for you. And that was the message you got all the time. Or for some of you, it's going to happen when you go to work tomorrow. Some of you work in a highly critical environment where it's just always about what you did wrong and what you've done wrong and what you're doing wrong. And it's exhausting, right? I define a critical attitude is one where someone dwells upon, and look at this, the perceived faults. Isn't that an important word there? Perceived faults of a person with no view to their good. No view to their good. So again, have you ever been in a relationship with someone who didn't talk about the good things you did, but boy, they sure wanted to talk about their perception of all your faults? You ever had to go through that? One of my favorite authors is a man named Dr. John Gottman. He and his wife have been studying marriage out in Seattle for, 40 or 50 years. They have this clinic. It is one of the coolest things I've ever seen and read about. They hook couples up in this room, and they hook their brains up to those machines so they can watch what happens in their brains when they get in conflict with each other, and they can test everything. And they've been studying this for years and years and years. They're like experts in marriage, and they said there are 4 things that are what they call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for marriage. They will destroy your marriage relationship, and one on the list is criticism. Criticism, they say, is destructive to relationships when it's about personality or character, not the behavior. So in other words, you are wrong, not this behavior is something I want to talk about. You hear the difference? Such a big difference. It's when it's filled with blame. When it's not focused on improvement. It's just, you did this wrong. Not how to do it better, not how I would like it done next time. When it's based only on one right way to do things, when the reality is, of course, there's more than one right way to do things, or it's belittling. It's something that tears the other person down. I say that when this happens in your relationships are really in trouble. Now, all of you can understand this. You all understand this. You understand that, like Gottmans have discovered, that a critical attitude destroys relationships, right? You all understand that. And not only does it destroy relationships, it destroys the person receiving the criticism, right? If you've lived in a relationship with someone who is highly critical, you know how beat down you felt, right? But there's an aspect of criticism that I never realized before until I started prepping this message, and I saw it in some verses I'm going to show you later, that I've never realized before, and that is how destructive a critical attitude is to the person who becomes critical. If you let that needle slide a little bit toward the critical side and you become critical towards a person or towards a situation, towards an environment, then it begins to damage you as well. I was reading this one author, and she was talking about it because she had a critical attitude that she'd been working to overcome in her life. And she said, well, over time, a critical attitude prevents you from seeing and appreciating all that's truly good in the world. And look at this, all that God is actively doing. So here's my question for you. Some of you went this entire week and you had no sense that God was actively at work all around you all week long. But he promised that he was. God worked every day in your life, whether you saw it or not. So could it be that one of the things that's interfering with our ability to see and participate with God and where he's working in this world today is that we've become too critical? Could it be that that's what's happening? We've just become too critical. You want to see how damaging it is? Do you know that when Jesus was here on earth, he was doing incredible things in front of everybody? I mean, he could walk on water. He could take a few loaves of bread and feed thousands of people till they were full. He could heal people who were sick. And one time, his friend Lazarus was dead. They put him in a tomb, wrapped him up for 3 days. He was dead. And Jesus came and had him roll the stone away and resurrected him, brought him back from the dead. And the religious leaders of his day, who had an intensely critical attitude, it says, went out from there and began to plot how they would kill Jesus. Wait a second. If somebody took us over to the cemetery and said, here's your shovel, let's dig him up. It was like, first off, no. But second, if they get him up and he's been in there for 3 days and then they go, okay, come on out. And they push the coffin open and they crawl out and they've been in there 3 days and we all know they're dead. And it's like, I'm going to go, who are you? Who are you? You're amazing. I got a little soreness in my shoulders. You want to touch this right now? That'd be great. Can you take care of this? I mean, that's what I'm doing. I'm like, where's the line? But with a critical attitude, you miss all that God is actively doing. So what if part of the reason why we live with a little sense of God's activity in our world is because we've become too critical? Now, here's the tricky part of this. If you could get in a time machine, go back to those religious leaders who were criticizing Jesus as he was doing the miracles, and you were to say to them, hey, do you think you have a critical attitude? What would their answer be? No, but Joe, he does. But Bill, man, you should go talk to him. He's got a critical attitude. But not me. Right? So here's the thing. Some of you are like, well, I wish my mom was here today. Man. Or I wish my friend was here today. I wish my boss was here. Okay, what if this is insidiously crept into your heart and mind, you're not even aware of it? Because nobody thinks they have an issue with this, or few people do. But what if it's affecting our relationship with God and our relationships with people? So we're in this series called Your Attitude, Your Life, and we're going to continue this series by talking about this today. What an incredibly important topic, how to replace a critical attitude, because it affects so much, not just our relationship with each other, it affects our relationship with God, and this is important. So I want to ask you to open up your program. Inside you'll find these notes. Would you grab them? Grab a pen. Welcome to those of you who are watching on YouTube. Glad you tuned in today. Also in the description section are those notes. You can open them up, or if you're watching on our website at pennielchurch.life, so glad you're watching there. You can't download the notes there yet. Someday I will figure that out, but not now. So let's get started. A couple of things. The first thing I want to do is we have to shut off the flow if we're being critical in our relationships. The first thing is we have to get control over our mouth. Now, the mouth isn't the root cause of this, but it's really important. It's like if you have a fire, the first thing is stop pouring the gas, right? Now we'll deal with the root cause of the fire, but let's get the gas off the fire first. So that's what this is about, is thinking before I speak. And I am not saying, be really clear, I am not saying that nobody should ever give constructive criticism, ever. I'm not saying that. Are you kidding me? One of my favorite stories about this, years ago, I was in Indiana and I was visiting this huge church. It easily could seat 1,000 people in this auditorium. And we went to the Saturday night service, and not the main ones on Sunday morning, and there were probably 600-700 people in there. And we're sitting there, and the pastor was up front teaching, and he was talking about, he wanted to use this phrase and weave it through his whole sermon, which sometimes preachers do. And he was like, and it was using the phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You've all heard that phrase, can't teach an old dog new tricks. Can't teach an old dog new tricks. But he kept screwing it up. He was so close. But instead of saying can't teach an old dog new tricks, he kept saying, well, you can't teach an old dog to turn tricks. Turning tricks is what prostitutes do. They turn a trick. So he, through his whole sermon, kept saying, well, you can't teach an old dog to turn tricks. Pretty sure you can. They make this little purple pill, probably feed it to the dog. That dog will turn tricks. I'm like, are you kidding me? And I am dying by the end of this sermon. That man needed some constructive criticism, right? He needed someone afterwards. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. So somebody needed to go up to him and say, just so you know, it's not quite the right way to say that. But I didn't say anything. But we all need it. We all need it. So I'm not saying there's no place for constructive feedback or constructive criticism. There certainly is, and we all can't grow without it. But here's what I know. When I look back on my life, there are seasons of my life or relationships in my life where I became too critical. There are environments where I am way too critical. For years and years and years, I couldn't go away and attend a different church on vacation and enjoy it, because I was too critical in that environment. I would sit there and critique everything I was watching around me. I couldn't even enjoy a worship service. One of the good things that happened when I wasn't teaching for a year is I started attending a church all the way down in Dubuque, and I loved it. And I was able to just be there and enjoy it. Yeah, there were things that I would have done differently. Oh, well. Just being in the environment was what I wanted. It was a really important time of healing for me. But I also look back, on things that I said and did with my kids where I'm like, I regret that. Too critical. You want to see where the bar is? You want to see what God says is supposed to define the way you and I talk to each other? Take a look at this verse. Look at this. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Now, if you've ever heard me teach before on this verse, I've taught on it because this is the verse that guides how I preach. If you want to know why I do the type of sermons I do, this is it. I want to preach what is helpful for building others up according to their needs so that it can benefit you. I want you always to be able to walk out and go, oh, I got something to do. I see how this applies to my life. This is the verse. It's why I teach a different way than I used to teach when I first got started. But he says, this is how we're supposed to talk to each other. So someone came up with this wonderful acronym years ago. I've taught on it a couple of times. I want you to learn this because I use it. About a month ago, I was driving in a car and I was thinking about a difficult conversation I was going to have with someone, and I used this acronym. So I want you to learn this because it can really help you. So here we go. Think before you speak. So the T in think stands for, is it true? Is it actually true? Do I know that it's true? Because here's what you need to understand. If your gauge has gone a little bit critical, then you will make negative assumptions about the person or the people you are in relationships with. You will jump to negative conclusions. Years ago, I had this guy come to me. He had a list of things that he didn't like about me and things that were wrong with me and the way I was leading and all this stuff. So I sat and listened to him, and as I was listening to him, there were three categories. There were some that were true. It's like, okay, that's true. And some that were kind of true, but not really the full truth, and some that were untrue, but he was convinced they were true. And I made no headway with that third column at all. Because if you become critical towards a person, then part of what happens is you just make negative assumptions about those people all the time. One of my favorite conflict resolution books is a book called Crucial Conversations. And I've taught on it before, and I was reviewing some of the material this week, and I thought, I need to teach this again, because here's the truth, too. Sometimes I teach what I need to hear, okay? Sometimes I need this so that I can improve skills that I need. And some of you are like, well, how do you know him? He's like, you were in my house this last week. He's like, no, I was in my house. And I was just telling you what I needed. And, oh, you need that too? Oh, great. All right, well, glad. But one of the things I love about that book is he says, before you ever go have a crucial conversation with someone, like your spouse really makes you mad, before you go, you need to stop and think through some things. And one of the questions, look at this. Why would a good, loving, and thoughtful person make this decision or say this? Right, that's what we're thinking, right? Some of you are mad at your spouse this morning. It's like, why would a good, thoughtful, loving person have said that to me last night? Well, no, that's not what we're thinking. We're not thinking that way at all. We jump to negative conclusions about people, but the reality is there was a process in their brain that led them to say or do what they did, and it probably wasn't, I want to hurt you as bad as I possibly can because I'm evil, right? That wasn't it. That wasn't what was in their head. But we jump to, when we get critical, we go negative like that, and we make negative assumptions about people. That's why the Bible is so clear about this. It says spouting off before listening, isn't it good to call it spouting off? Before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. There are facts that you are unaware of. So give the person the benefit of the doubt. Why would a good, loving, reasonable person say something like that or do something like that? Now, isn't that a more honoring way to say something? So much better. So much less critical. So is it true? You got to get to that. You don't spout off before you know the facts. The second thing is it helpful? So the T is it true? The H is it helpful? T, is it true? H, is it helpful? Again, I want you to learn this because I use this. I want you to see how helpful this whole thing can be. Is it helpful? Now look at again, back at the verse that I said was the kind of the guide for this. Look at what's underlined. Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but look at the next word after the word but. What if that's what we did? What if you and I said only what is helpful? Now, you know when you look at a verse like that not everything you've said to your spouse over the years was helpful. Not everything you've said to your kids over the years was helpful. It was quite opposite of helpful. It was destructive. It was painful. I mean, that's reality, right? Do any of you want to claim that you only say what is helpful? Some of you, if you think that you only say what's helpful, we've got another thing we need you to attend called counseling. So, wow. Nobody does this right. So he says only what is helpful. And so I did some research online to say, what's a better way to think about this, or a practical way? I want to give you some tools for this today. So I went back to Dr. John Gottman and his wife. They teach on this, and they say, so this is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. How to destroy your marriage, be critical. Now, obviously, though, your spouse isn't perfect, right? You all know that. Your kids aren't perfect. Your coworkers aren't perfect. Your friends aren't perfect. They're going to do stuff that hurts you. So what do? Just ignore it because you don't want to give criticism? No. So they studied, and I saw the Mrs. Gottman teaching on this last week. She said, we studied 3,000 couples that have great marriages. 3,000 couples, and how do you handle it? A complaint, they call it a complaint when something happens. And I don't have this on your notes, so if you need this, you can write it down. It works for any relationship. First, they said, always start with I. That's not what we typically start with, though. We start with you, right? Don't start with you. You make me so mad. When you do this, don't start with you, start with I. Always start with I. And they said sometimes people aren't emotionally aware of what they're feeling, so they just put it under this broad category. I'm upset. And some of you, this is the conversation you need to have with your parents or with a friend this next week. You need to have this conversation. You say, I'm hurt. I'm disappointed. I'm upset. Maybe with your kids, I'm disappointed. This is how I feel. And then they said, then the second thing they do is about what? And they don't blame the person, they keep it factual. So it's not, I'm upset that you forgot to take the garbage out again last week. No, that's not it. It's not personal. They just talk about what? That the garbage wasn't taken out. Do you hear the difference between you didn't take it out or the garbage wasn't taken out? Do you hear the difference? It's about what? That there's a new dent in the car. I'm upset about that. One time, one of my kids drove the car. I went out to get in my car, and there's a huge scratch out of the front right fender. None of my kids had told me about it. So I'm like, who did this? 5 no's. Well, somebody did it. It's like, and I'm upset. There's a new dent in the car. Okay? I'm upset that the bills haven't been paid. Again, not you didn't pay the bills. These little differences make a huge difference because they keep defensiveness down in the relationship so they can receive what you're saying without going off. And then describe what you need. And this is where they say, you try and make it positive. I need you to take out the garbage. I need you to drive more carefully so our car can be protected. So it's just this formula. I feel this way, and when this happens. So could we please try to come up with a solution together so this doesn't happen anymore? How much more respectful is that than saying, I'm so mad at you because of what you did last night. You are for goodness sakes. How you do it really matters, and there's a way to do it right and a way to do it wrong. So how good are you at speaking criticism in a helpful way? Only what is helpful is what the Bible says. Some of you say, oh, I'm doing it that way. I wonder if you are. I wonder if the people around you would say that you are. Some of you like the way you do it. Because sometimes, doesn't it? It just feels a little good to unload. Sometimes, just be honest, it's like you are getting it. Okay, then you need to evaluate the outcome of your method. Is it helping the relationship get better? Only what is helpful, the Bible says. Third, the I is it inspiring confidence. Some of you are like, well, that's not in the Bible. Well, hold that thought, because I'll show you. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it going to inspire confidence in this other person? Now, let's go back to that verse, because some of you are like, well, that's not in there. Well, look at this. What are we supposed to do in our relationships? What does the underlined part say? Build them up. So here's my question for you. Do your words build up the people you're in relationship or tear down? Now, again, some of you are like, well, in most of my relationships, it's building them up. It's not about most of your relationships. It's really about all of them. The only thing that you and I get to say as followers of Jesus is in this verse. This is what he says. Do you build others up? So with your marriage, are you building up your spouse? Are your words building them up or tearing them down? Are your words building up your kids? How important is confidence in the hearts of our kids? Do you know what happens if you raise a confident kid? They go out and change the world because they're not afraid. And if they fail, they're not afraid of that. And they get back up again. And one of the things we've talked about recently in this series was how unresilient today's generation is. They get hit with something, they're like, oh, like a wet paper towel, down they go. It's like, I'll never get up again. It's like, this will never get better. He's like, where is this coming from? My goodness, it's like no resilience. And then you look at what's happening behind the scenes. In one study, what they did, in a 3-year study in one city's schools found that the teachers were 75% negative. 75% of what they said was tearing down, not building up. 75%. And then they went into homes. And parents, we give 10 criticisms on average for every one favorable comment. So you wonder why there's no resilience? We're tearing them down and we're not even aware of it. Gottman's research, the magic ratio, according to what they've learned in all their years of studying, is 5 to 1. They found that as long as there are 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative, a couple has a stable relationship. Did you know that? 5 to 1. That's what you need for a healthy marriage. Do you have that, by the way? And don't think about the other person. Think about you. Are you giving that? Are you giving 5 for every 1 negative? Think about it with your children. Do your kids hear 5 positive things from you for every 1 criticism that you give? Do your coworkers hear 5 positive for every 1 negative? Somebody like, you don't know who I work with. I know it's hard. I get that. But this is what he says. We say only what is necessary, helpful for building others up. Are your words building up the people around you or tearing down? How are you doing on this ratio? You know, mom, dad, is this how it looks with your kids in the way you talk? Is this how it looks in your marriage in the way that you're talking to them? Would your spouse say, yep, that's true. That's what I'm receiving. This is what you need to think about. Is it inspiring confidence in them? Because we're there to build others up. And then fourth, is it necessary, which I really don't have time to teach on. But the reality is some things you don't need to say, right? You ever done that? You've said something like, oh, I didn't need to say that. This one has saved me. It's like THIN. Oh, no, it's not necessary. I don't need to say this. And then the most important of them all, in my opinion, is the last one. Oh, by the way, there's the necessary according to their needs. Do they need to hear this? Now, sometimes they need to hear it because your relationship is suffering. Right? So, again, the verse says, is it necessary? And then the last one, is it kind? And to me, this is the most powerful of them all, and I'll show you that in a moment. Is it kind? Let me give you an example of this. There was a pastor. He was a pastor of a huge church. one of these mega churches in America, and he got a chance to go and travel and speak at seminars and conferences. And so he would get on the plane and he'd fly to wherever he's supposed to be speaking. He'd speak for the weekend, and then he'd come back to his church. And one time he was on a flight together with his other very, very famous mega church pastor, and that guy always flew first class. Well, the other guy didn't. Right? Does it matter? I mean, it doesn't really matter, but the megachurch pastor that always flew first class criticized the other guy and said, you should always fly first class because the man of God must arrive prepared and rested and ready to go. And he's like, well, okay. I don't really agree with that, but okay. But he got criticized because he was flying coach rather than first class. Okay. No, I don't really care about that. He got on a flight and he did what he did. Well, a while later, he had to go to another seminar, and so he got to the airport, and they'd made a mistake with his ticket, and they upgraded him for free to first class. That's cool. I have never flown first class in my life, but I've seen it. I've walked through. They get on first. They get better food. They get better drinks. They get better seats. I mean, you don't have to worry about somebody on you. You got a little space in those seats, like, woohoo, leg room. Kind of tall. It's like, yeah. So he's so excited. He gets on first. He's sitting in his seat, and he gets his drink order right away, and people are still coming on, and all of a sudden one person comes on who recognizes him, knows that he's this megachurch pastor, and he walks by him, and he said, oh, great. What a way to spend the church's money. Megachurch pastors living the megachurch lifestyle. What? So I'm criticized because I don't fly first class. Now I'm criticized when I get upgraded for free, so let's evaluate it. Is it true? Was that nasty critic's comment true? No. He wasn't spending church money on it. It was free, but that critic didn't know it. But remember what critics do? They jump to negative assumptions about people, right? That's what they do. Is it helpful? No. Now they both feel bad. They both are on a plane and they both feel bad. Was it going to build up confidence? No. Was it necessary? Was it even necessary to say anything? Really? It's not. When did we think all this stuff is necessary? And was it kind? Nope. And if you can't match the criteria, don't say it. Think before you speak. Does this make sense? Do you think you can do this in your relationships? We can learn how to think. Like I said, about a month ago, I was driving in the car. I'm like, I got to have this. And all of a sudden, this popped in. I'm like, oh no. I'm not ready to talk yet. Because I need to figure this piece out before I do. Does that make sense? This is what we do. We build our relationships this way. We think before we speak. But that's not all. The second part of this is I make my flaws my primary focus in every relationship I'm in. I make my flaws the primary focus, not your flaws. My flaws are the primary relationship focus in every relationship that I'm in. Have you ever had the unfortunate situation to have somebody make your flaws the focus of the relationship? Years ago, I had this situation happen with this woman who got really mad at me, and she was very critical. And so one time she came into my office, she had, I don't know how many pages, I still have it somewhere, 6 or 7 pages long of criticisms with me. So I sat with her for over 2 hours, went through it line by line, explained every one, because many of the things that she had assumed, some of the things were true, and it's like, okay, that's good, I need to take away and think about that. And so many of them were, well, that's not what's actually happening, this is what's happening. You just jumped, I didn't say that, but she jumped to the wrong conclusion about so many of these things. So I spent 2 hours with her. By the end, she's crying and apologizing for the way she's written and said all this, and I'm like, okay. 2 weeks later, guess who's back with a new list? 2 weeks. Needs to stay. She didn't stay in the church very long. And then the other turnaround question is this. Is she a perfect person? Such a perfect person that she really should be focused so much on me? Well, she had a life-altering addiction. She had a broken marriage that was unhealthy. And she had other stuff that I knew about. But boy, this church would be a lot better if I wasn't here. Have you ever had the unfortunate situation of having someone make your faults and your flaws the reason for why the world isn't a better place? If you have, then you are in great company, because Jesus said the exact same thing happened to him. One time he was talking about it, he said these religious leaders were so critical. He said, listen, John the Baptist, he came and he didn't eat and drink. He stayed out in the wilderness. He, ate locusts, bugs. That's how he survived. He ate bugs and drank from the river, and he wore, just basic, animal skins. And they criticized him and said, oh, he's got a demon, because who wants to eat bugs? And so then Jesus said, I, the Son of Man, I come along, I eat and drink, and they say, he's a glutton. He's a drunkard. He's a friend of tax collectors. It's like, and what he's saying, this is really, really, really important. And one of the reasons why this is so important for you today in your relationships, if you let that needle move at all towards critical, if you let that go towards critical in a key relationship in your life, then the other person feels like you have become unpleasable. And that's what Jesus is saying. Because if we do it this way, they're mad and criticize. If we do it the opposite way, they're mad and criticize. There's no win, no relationship with this person possible. That's why criticism is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for destroying your marriage. Because you can't win. Nobody wants to be in a relationship where you feel like you can't win. You can't ever do anything right. It's a miserable experience to have. So how do you know if that needle has started to move? There's something so important. I never saw this before in the Bible. I was reading this like, oh my goodness, I never saw this. So let me show you what I saw. This will give you a sign that you have started to move towards critical in a key relationship. Romans 14:10 says, why do you criticize and pass judgment on your brother? So the criticized verse was the verse that I was looking at, and then I saw the second part of that. Why do you pass judgment on your brother? So you know what judgment is? Have you ever been to court? You ever stood in front of a judge? I got a moving violation as a teenager. Had to go to court, stand in front of the judge. Judge is up on that big seat in front of you. It's like, scary, right? So he's saying, why are you up on the judge's seat toward any other human being? And the interesting thing that struck me the first time ever is criticism and judgment are connected. They're connected. I don't know which causes the other. I'm not even trying to figure that out, but they are related. If you develop a critical attitude towards someone, you become judgmental towards that person. You climb up in the judge's seat and you start looking down at them. Now, how do you know that you're doing this? Labels. You start labeling the people in your relationships. Oh, they are so selfish. They are so stupid. They're mean. They're lazy. We put labels on them. And labels are always a sign that you are now in the judge's seat, sitting up high, looking down on the people in your life. So think about the people who've hurt you the most in your life and ask yourself, do I have any labels on them? Do I have any labels on them? Have I labeled them? Have I? Because it's a sign that you've become judgmental and too critical toward that person. But you're like, Brian, you don't know what they did to me. You're right, I don't. But it doesn't matter what they did to you. You don't get to choose this because it destroys you. Critical attitude destroys you. You miss the activity of God in your life. I don't want that for you. Matter of fact, look what he goes on to say. He says, so why do you criticize and pass judgment on your brother? And why do you look down upon or despise your brother? And he says, guess who gets to sit in the judgment seat? Only one. You will never stand in judgment before me, ever. And I won't stand in judgment before you, ever. God alone sits in the judge's seat. That's it. So he said, why are you up there looking down on them? Why are you up there labeling them? So do you have anyone labeled in your life? Have you started to look down on somebody because they're not doing something or they are doing something, and you've got a label on them and you're sitting here and you think you're better than? Here's what I want you to understand. Different doesn't mean better. It doesn't mean better. I sin differently than the people who've really hurt me in my life, but that doesn't mean I'm better. Doesn't mean I'm better in any way. Here's the thing, because some of you are like, but Brian, if I would never make the decision that person made, ever. The one who's hurt me so bad, I would never make that decision. Here's the thing, if we took you out of life and human existence and took them out, and we put you into their childhood, into their home environment, and you were beat by a drunk dad at the age of 7, I guess you might live a little different, wouldn't you? That's why the judging has no place. We have no idea what has brought them to this point of development. That's why he says, don't you dare think that different is better. You don't do what they do, but you do. And you do different things. And different is not better, right? So don't you dare crawl up in God's seat of judgment and look down on anyone and label them and think you're better than. Just because you don't do what they do, you never will be better than them. That's not how this works. Different is not better. And if you'd have been in their environment, raised in their home, and had the same experiences, you might be doing exactly what they're doing, and you can't say you wouldn't because you haven't lived it. So what does God want us to do? Instead of sitting in judgment, he says this. Jesus said, I love this quote from Oswald Chambers. He said, beware of anything that puts you in the place of the superior person. Anything that makes you feel superior is not conducive to your spiritual life. Do you feel like you're better than someone in your life? And again, think about the people that have hurt you the most, because that tends to be who we do this to. You're not better. Different is not better. So Jesus comes along, he says, here's what I want you to do. We said, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, which, by the way, will take you the rest of your life. And you will die and not accomplish it. Unless you think you're going to achieve perfection here on earth, in which case I can recommend some other churches for you in the area that will be really much better. They'll be much better able to handle your perfection in attendance, because we won't be able to, because we will never arrive. So then you can see clearly to remove the speck from your own brother's eye. He said, don't do this, this isn't right. So oh man, this whacked me so hard when I was prepping this week. Because remember that woman I told you about at the beginning? The woman who came with the 6 or 7 page, 2-hour conversation, then 2 weeks later came with another one. I really, really, really have a bad attitude towards this woman. Really have a bad attitude. And it wasn't until prepping this message that I realized what I've done wrong. She was in the judgment seat, judging me, looking down on me, acting like she was better than me, and that made me really mad and hurt me. So what did I do? I climbed in the judgment seat myself, and I looked down on her. Because she does this. And then all of a sudden this week as I was prepping, God just kind of kept nudging me with those verses. It's like, different is not better. Different is not better. Yeah, you've never taken 6 or 7 pages of criticism into somebody's life and done this, but you've done other things, haven't you? Different isn't better. And Jesus said, get out of my seat. She will never one day stand in front of you for judgment, ever. Get out of my seat. Stop looking down on her. She just does things differently than you do. It's not better. And you're not better. And there's a tremendous humility that comes in when you start to get this, right? This is how we're supposed to live in our relationships. So I shut off the flow, but then I change what's going on in my head and my heart toward the other person. Different isn't better. It's just different. And I have no reason to look down on you. I never will. I have no reason to sit in judgment and look down on you, no matter what you do or what you have done, because I'm not your judge. I have no time to teach on the third point, but there's something essential that I just have to show you, because it ties right into this whole thing. In the fall, we're going to do a whole series on kindness, and the whole third point was about kindness. And I wanted you to understand what really changed. I'll give you that, because I know some of you want to fill in the blank. So there, you can write that one down. Well, you understand what really changes people, and this is so essential. And I'm just going to give you like 10 seconds on this, because you got to understand this. But we're going to do a whole series this fall on it. We're going to do a 40-day kindness challenge this fall, where we try and be kind for 40 days. It's going to be the hardest thing we've ever tried. So here we go, though. This is what you need to understand. If I were to ask you what changes people, the people who have a critical attitude, you're not even trying to think about changing them in a positive way, are you? Like, I wasn't trying to think about changing that person. I want to hurt that person. Is that an ugly thing to say? I want them in front of me apologizing for what they've done, right? Nothing kind. But how do you actually change a human being? The Bible is very clear. There are 3 forces that God uses when he wants to change a human being: grace, truth, and time, right? I've taught on this multiple times. I'm going to teach on this so many times till every human being knows what it takes to change their spouse, what it takes to change their friends, what it takes to change a child. Grace, truth, and time. And this is the proper formula, right? It is a mountain of grace. You come to God, the very first thing you get is grace. Unbelievable, unstoppable, indescribable grace. And there's truth in there, there's no doubt about it, and massive amount of time to fail and repeat and fail and repeat and fail and repeat. If you've become critical towards someone, this is what you think works, and this doesn't work. Some of you have tried to criticize your spouse into changing. How's that working? They've just become so much more gentle now, haven't they? More respectful, loving. I mean, they run to take the trash out with joy in their heart because of all the criticism they've received, right? That works. When are we going to understand this doesn't work? And go back to the formula that God uses when he wants to change a human being. Massive amounts of grace, kindness, love, acceptance, unconditional love. as a foundation for everything. This is what God uses when he wants to change something. There is truth, but there's time. Now, the truth is this message surprised me because of how many times I got whacked prepping it. I learned so much, and after finishing prepping and teaching it, I'm like, I have a long way to go in this one, and I didn't know that. So I'm always so surprised about the Bible's ability to cut through all the garbage that we carry in here thinking, oh yeah, this will be good for some of you. I was like, oh boy, this is good for me. So those of you who say you follow Jesus, my question is this an issue for you? Could it be that part of the reason why you're missing the activity of God is you've become too critical? Is there anyone you're aware of in your life where you sit on the judgment seat? Is there anyone you're looking down on? You've got labeled. You've put yourself in the spot of God because God has brought you in here today, no accident, to say, could you get out of my chair? Because different isn't better. You don't ever get to sit there. And you need to understand the force that I use to change you is the same force I'm going to use to change them, and it starts with grace. It starts with grace. Whew, tough, right? Memorize that formula. Learn to think. For those of you exploring God, one of the things I hear regularly from people and why they resist God is because they say to me, well, you don't know what I've done. And they think that something in their past that they keep hidden away, that they're ashamed of, is going to make it so that God really doesn't really love them. And they run from a God of pure love, and that is not, you have nothing to fear. You never need to be afraid to turn to God, ever. First off, he saw it all anyway. Second, he already paid for it all. With his son's death on the cross, the Father paid in full for everything we've done that's wrong. Let me have you bow your heads. Here's what I want you to know. God stands here, hands open to you, saying, hey, you can come right now today, just as you are. I've seen it all, and I love you. I'm crazy in love with you. And if you'll let me, I will forgive you, come and make my home inside of you, and I will pour so much grace into your life that will begin to change you from within. And if you want that kind of relationship with God, you can have it today with your head bowed and your eyes closed. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I've heard today that you died on a cross for me, that you paid for this stuff that I've tried to keep hidden in my life, that I'm ashamed of and I regret. So I am crying out to you today, Jesus. Please forgive me. Please come and make your home inside of me. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish up today, can I ask you all to take the little card out of your program? It says Peniel Church at the top. Everyone just grab this, even if you're a regular tender, and just take a moment to fill this out and check the box. Let us know if you've prayed and asked for his forgiveness. There's a box right here. Check that one, or maybe you renewed your commitment today. Then just drop it in one of the 2 wooden offering boxes back on the back wall. Thanks so much for coming. And again, I hope you can see you next week. Next week's topic is all about doubt. What do you do when you're struggling with some doubts about God? Some of you, this is going to be a great one to invite a friend to. And ice cream, right? So don't forget that. Hope to see you again next week.